This is Chris, not in central Pennsylvania, but kind of somewhere almost in central UK. We're not quite, a little south. We're still in the south, not quite to the Midlands here. In Cambridgeshire, that's how they say it correctly, yes?
That's correct.
Okay, and my guest is none other than Fiona. Can you hear me? Who is that real quick? Erica. Erica is in Australia still, I believe. Erica Holtzkamp. Can you hear me, Erica? Just if anybody can hear us, give me a thumbs up, because sometimes this microphone acts a little wonky. I just need to know if you can hear me. So YouTube is currently saying 0 viewers, and there's some, okay, she can hear us.
There we go.
It's saying 0 viewers, and Erica's there watching.
Hello, Erica.
She's the one in Australia visiting her kids. All right, so welcome back to the program, folks. This is one I've been looking forward to for a long time, an interview in person. Fiona and I have been chatting away the hour, for 2 hours now we've been chatting.
At least.
So first off, I'm remiss. Let me welcome my guest. Fiona, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. I feel it's an honor to be here.
It's very kind of you. She gave me a personal copy of her book, White Zulu, by Fiona Timms. Ross, that's hard to hear, by Fiona Ross. I even said that before, should we go before, and I got it wrong anyway. But anyway, Fiona did this, and she wrote a very kind dedication. Do you mind if I read it?
Go ahead.
Okay, so to Chris, an amazing person, a man of great integrity, a brilliant rock hunter, and a valuable asset to my beloved South Africa. May you enjoy my life story with all my gratitude and admiration. It says from.
Fiona.
I wasn't sure if it said from or love. So Fiona, thank you so much for that, Fiona. It's very kind of you. Definitely something I'm going to have to read. She also brought me about 60 kgs of books that she wanted to give to me, which I can't take back with me. I will take some of them back. She has some incredible books she's offered to me. It's very generous of her. So we're here in
Huntington.
Huntington, that's right, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we're in Huntington, not too far from Cambridge, and I hope you guys are doing well. So this is going to be kind of a little mini interview and talk to her about her life. I know some of you watch her videos, and you've seen some of the stories she recounts her life. Some of you are probably refugees from Loving Lunacy and have seen some of it over there. But for those of you unfamiliar, Fiona is from South Africa, grew up in Natal, yes?
Yes.
And we're going to talk a little bit about her life and what brought her to the UK. She's been here, I think, for 23 years now.
Correct, yes. 23
years, wow.
Yes.
You got to have a strong stomach to stay in England for 23 years.
I love it here.
She loves it here, okay, excellent.
I do.
That's good. We'll have to get Hendo's opinion on that. But Fiona, thanks for meeting up with me today. It's been a real privilege to meet you.
A privilege to me too, thank you.
It's very generous of you to say so. Listen, you had a very interesting childhood. You grew up in Natal,
yes.
And I have not read your book, but I've talked to you a bit in the past, a little bit this morning,
yes.
and as I understand it, you kind of had a childhood similar to a lot of South Africans, yes. In that your parents were kind of absentee and you were kind of raised by domestic workers, yes?
That is correct. They were expecting sons, and they had 4 daughters.
Oh, that didn't go right at all.
And the extraordinary thing is that the Zulus rejoiced every time a girl was born, because for them that means lobola, which is bride price.
Yeah.
Yes. They were thrilled. My parents were horrified, disappointed, and handed us promptly over to the Zulu nannies to raise. And that was the most amazing childhood I had. I didn't go
obviously, you grew up speaking Zulu.
Only Zulu.
Oh, not even English or Afrikaans?
No Afrikaans.
No.
My father was absolutely hated the Afrikaners, but paradoxically, he loved the fact that they were running the country to his satisfaction.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
Yes.
But so you were raised by these Zulu nannies?
Yes, there were 2 of them for 4 of us.
Wow. You said the 4 of you must have been quite a handful. It took 2.
We fought, not just words, but physically.
Physical fighting?
Yeah.
Girls aren't known for that.
No, yes they are. We were knocked down, drag out fights. And that was how, because we didn't know any different. Our neighbors were at least 3 to 4 miles away, because our ranches are so big there.
Yeah.
They worked them out by my great-grandfather, got on horseback, rode for a day, put a peg in the ground, rode for another day, put another peg in the ground.
And that's how they marked out the
Exactly.
property.
Then he paid 21 guineas to the Crown at the Lands River Magistrate Court, and the land was his. There was nobody on the land except the Bushmen. Mm-hmm. And it's a very sad thing that unfortunately, because of all the stock theft, and I have the records copied from the Lions River Magistrate District, that they stole not only hundreds but thousands of cattle, horses and sheep. So that era they were exterminated.
That's horrible.
They were considered vermin.
Yeah, that's horrible. But I mean, the reality is that throughout South Africa's history, from the time that the Nguni-speaking peoples arrived, crossing the Zambezi, then the Limpopo River, coming down through KZN and working their way to the west over the Great Fish River, the reality is the cultures that came there were cattle cultures that came, and they interacted with the Khoisan, who are like, ah, that's a juicy meal.
Yes.
And so cattle raiding was a norm for those groups, and then the Khoisan, so it was a normal part of South African history before Europeans began to arrive, and that's not something they were accustomed to, people stealing their livestock.
Well, it's so much easier to catch a cow than it is to catch an eland.
That's true. They're a little faster and more versatile.
And we have 1,000 eland on our ranch at the moment, which is a big number.
So the ranch is still there then?
We still have it in the family.
And who's running it, if I'm asking?
My older sister's running it.
Okay.
And my sons go out every year, sometimes twice a year, to spend 3 glorious weeks doing exactly what we did as children there.
Wow, that's incredible.
Swimming in the river, catching trout, walking through the bush, and everything else that is good.
No, that's brilliant. You know, it's one of the things that always disturbs me about life. Life doesn't disturb me, but things about life and culture is that with urbanization, so many kids are disconnected from the natural world around them.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why we created zoos back in the day, so that kids would still see, I mean, not just kids, but be exposed to it, and adults as well. But so many people are disconnected. I mean, when you hear a member of the African National Congress say with a straight face, why do we need the farmers? We shop at Pick and Pay. Or Checkers. I mean, seriously, how do you think this stuff gets to Checkers and Pick and Pay?
Well, this is the hunter-gatherer mentality. And the truth of this business that the ANC are trying to whitewash our history is that the cattle owners were confined to where there was no frost. And that includes most of the Natal Midlands, the Orange Free State, and anywhere above a certain sea level. So effectively, there were no people, or Nguni people, in all those areas. They just simply couldn't cope because, as my father did, we cut hay, made silage, and brought in cattle food to see them through the winter.
But there was no one to buy the cattle feed in prior to that.
No, if you're a hunter-gatherer and you've got cattle, you just move on. But they were trapped effectively in Zululand between the Lebombo Mountains and the sea, the ocean. And it was quite a narrow sort of squeeze to keep moving around. And that's why there was so much of murder, I can only call it murder, amongst the Zulus. It was over land, over territory. They didn't actually own the land, but they had they were territorial. Sure. Pretty much as all primates are.
Well, in fact, when Dingane was defeated and tried to, he sent impis north to relocate. Some of them went, of course, into what is today Mozambique around Lourenço Marques, but they were decimated by malaria.
That's right.
And he said his army went up there, came back, and just completely wiped out. And so he had no choice but to go north against the Swazi.
Exactly.
And the Swazi would usually fight and then retreat, but they stood their ground for once. And he lost, and then of course he lost his kingship, and then was just executed there.
That was it. Yes.
Yeah, but the natural barriers that you're talking about, and this is one of them, the malaria zone that takes place along the coast.
Yes.
And then of course
tsetse fly.
That's right. Or as we say in America, tsetse fly. Yes, it's the same thing. Water, you know.
And other diseases which I've mentioned in my book. Blackwater
fever.
Exactly. Caused by parasites mainly. And they decimated the cattle unless they stayed in that narrow, short area, because they didn't come south of the my brain's hit me.
The Zambezi, or?
No, I'm talking about Zululand.
Oh,
thank you. The Mfolozi River. The White Mfolozi, They didn't come down much past there. According to the missionaries who wrote this amazing book, the cradle days of Natal.
Well, in fact, the book, you have it, you showed it to me, and the last chapter is about the Americans arrive, essentially.
Right.
It's about the missionaries, which is interesting because I've always had a connection to South Africa tangentially, even if I had not become an Africanist, because I attended Ohio University. And I attended the military training in a building called Lindley Hall, named after Daniel Lindley, who was one of the most famous missionaries in KZN. There is a bust of him in the Church of the Vow in Pietermaritzburg. Of Daniel Lindley. You know that bust.
I know it. I lived in Maritzburg.
There you go. So you know that bust. And when I went to Pietermaritzburg for the first time, one of my pilgrimages, so to speak, not to abuse the religious term, but one of my pilgrimages was to go to the Church of the Vow, so I could see that bust of Daniel Lindley and see that it was actually there, because Lindley Hall is named after him, and that's where I got my military education at university. So that's interesting. And the reason it's named after Daniel Lindley is he's one of the earliest graduates of Ohio University.
And you were hooked. Once you
absolutely.
have any interaction, the minute you put foot on African soil,
it's in you.
It's got you.
Yeah, it's in you. Pretty crazy. But so that was my first linkage to KwaZulu-Natal, and of course the interest in the struggles that took place between the Zulu and the Trek Boers, and then the Anglo-Boer War. All of that stuff plays out. So, and Natal has been it's got more battlefields than some places in Europe.
It absolutely has, and I've been to all the same ones you have, which is extraordinarily good, especially if you have a good guide. Unfortunately, one whom I knew well
was passed on.
Was murdered.
Oh, shame. That's really shame.
And his Zulu was perfect. He was, and I need to correct this because I created a tautology when I said I'd named myself Umlungu Mhlophe, which is quite wrong. It means white man. And I want to correct this.
Sure, go ahead.
I meant to say Umuntu Mhlophe, which means a white black man. And I stole it from my grandfather, who spoke Zulu so well that in the dark or the thick mist,
they didn't know it wasn't a Zulu.
They didn't know he wasn't Zulu. They thought he was one of them. And my father was the same.
Well, it's interesting, Fiona, because not so much now, but 20 years ago, you go to South Africa, 10 years ago, and you'd hear a lot of black South Africans complain, well, whites are, when they learn an African language. And for the Afrikaners, my first point to them is, well, first off, those who speak Afrikaans are already speaking African language.
Yes.
Okay, so you need to admit that. That language grew up in South Africa. But most South Africans, particularly if they're rural, but not just exclusive rural, or those who are wealthy live in urban areas, all had domestic help, and their kids are typically raised by someone speaking Venda, Xhosa, Zulu, or Tswana, or something like that. We had a white officer, a lieutenant colonel, came to the War College my first year there, and he spoke Tswana because he's from Pretoria, and then he had nannies, and so I mean it's pretty common for a lot of South Africans. Now I realize there are South Africans who are white who don't speak a second language, especially English speakers, but not exclusively. But it is very common for white South Africans to speak another language, particularly an African language.
Exactly, you're quite right.
But that's a myth that's talked about South Africans. It's simply inaccurate. If they don't speak another language, it's an African language. I mean...
No, it's not true.
Yeah, it's not true.
Most of us as children, well certainly us, grew up bilingual.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it was easier to learn French. Spent a year in Switzerland.
Ooh.
Getting up to no good.
I'm sure that was fun.
It was. I have described it. And I became... No, that's right.
Right here in her book, White Zulu, by Fiona Ross.
Sorry.
So you described it, learning the language, bilingual. You described it.
Then it was easy to learn French. And then I learned Xhosa because I spent a lot of time in the Western Cape.
Okay.
So I effectively speak 5 languages, but I can't count because I didn't go to school till I was 12. Exactly. And I was only sent to the government school for a term to learn Afrikaans in one term, so I could pass the entrance exam to St. Anne's Diocesan College, a boarding school for girls. And they'd held me back from going there, and I resented this until I got there and realized it wasn't such fun. Because my younger sister...
You really wanted to get there, and then you got there and you're like, this isn't so great.
I hated it. I hated it.
It's a Catholic school.
No, high church.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
okay. You did say you had to learn Afrikaans for it.
And
oh,
no, I know.
It's brutal.
And got to go 3 times a day. And on my bony knees, I was skinny like a rat. and having to pray to this unknown. Both my parents were atheists, and they sent me to church school because it was supposedly the best
Very
school
good
in the
school,
country.
yes.
However,
I suppose the good news is they sent you to school.
that is true, but it was assumed when I got to school at the age of 12, which is standard 6, that I knew how to count.
And you didn't.
Still can't.
Oh my goodness.
Once I've got my fingers and my toes, I'm lost.
Wow. Well, you know, Fiona, that's interesting and not related to that, but it does make a point that with children, they have to start learning at an early age,
Yes.
and you have to focus on literacy and mathematics, because if you don't, you never recoup that.
No.
And I think that's proof. You're saying you still have difficulty counting all these years
Still
later.
can't. No, without a calculator, I'm sunk. And also, I don't know if the answer's correct. However,
someone can cheat you.
so anyone can cheat me. Luckily, I have exceptionally good carers who make sure. and they laugh because it's part of the joke.
We're getting a thumbs up over here from the caregiver.
I know. What I was going to say was, carry on, Chris.
No, with
Come back to me.
the counting, so people can cheat you.
Oh yes. Came back to me. I taught myself to read, probably about the age, possibly 3 or 4. I can't remember.
Wow.
But our farmhouse was filled with books. My grandfather had what they called the traveling book salesman, and he had an ox wagon with 16 oxen, a span.
Wow.
Proper span, and he piled that up with books, and he traveled all around the Midlands selling books to all the farmers, because we didn't have libraries in those days.
Sure.
And my grandfather used to buy so many different books, and he was into history. He wasn't into fiction that much. And then my father continued that by buying all the books about the Second World War. He fought as a bomber pilot for the South African Air Force, fought in the desert, bombing the Italians.
In North Africa.
Yes, in North Africa. They were trying to hook up with Rommel and create serious trouble for us Brits. And so...
Well, it was going badly until Al Alamein, and it kind of turned around.
It did. It did. However, I started with the big books because they were at the bottom of the bookshelf.
You could
so
reach
I
them
read
easier.
Tolstoy's War and Peace.
Oh, that's a big
And
chunk
it's
to
heavy,
take.
but
Yeah.
I read it. And then I continued with the history books, Grandpa's war books, the Hornblower series, C.S. Forrester.
Horatio Hornblower, is that the Hornblower series, or is it different?
I think so.
Okay.
C.S. Forrester.
Okay.
He's was a brilliant writer.
Yes.
And eventually, right at the very top, were the children's books, the Enid Blyton nonsense, crap. Sorry. But that's how I learned to speak fluently and write comprehensively. But I didn't learn punctuation either.
Ah.
So when I write, luckily it doesn't show up in the videos, but I throw commas in as if they were salt or pepper. I just throw
Just
them in.
flavoring everything, huh?
I know. Wherever it says maybe there's, I don't know. I just break up sentences
Now,
arbitrarily.
that's interesting,
with
Fiona, because
comma.
I'm a bit of a grammar Nazi.
I'm really careful.
You have to use commas judiciously around me.
Luckily, my editor sorted that problem out with my
That's
book.
excellent. That's nice to
Yeah.
have that. No, but it's interesting that you started with those books. That was very challenging. Tolstoy. That's not something a kid can
that's
start
it.
with.
Yeah.
No, I know, but I mean that's engrossing. That's as a kid, I was reading science fiction and things
Yeah.
like that, and historical fiction, of course, and that's how I got interested in South Africa, was James
yes.
Michener's book, The Covenant. But also, I enjoyed Tolkien, The Hobbit, and Silmarillion, things like that.
I was given a copy.
Yeah, when I was a
that.
kid, I really enjoyed those things. So I was never into like Heinlein, that's a big science fiction. A lot of people like Robert Heinlein, but I never really read that sort of thing. But for me, geography was fascinating. I would go to the library and pull out atlases and gazetteers and page through them in all these places.
We got a copy of the National Geographic sent in by post, and I devoured those.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
really did.
They were amazing.
And
that
then
was
I
before they went woke.
I bought an encyclopedia of animals, so sort of the biology of animals. And what I didn't include in your selection, because it's one of my favorite books, is all about the behavior and everything you need to know about African animals.
That's kind of handy to have.
Oh, I love it.
So you kind of self-taught yourself to read, and then you went to school and suffered miserably through that. But later in life, you came to the UK. Let's jump ahead a little bit. What brought you here? You've been here 23 years. It wasn't the weather. It wasn't the weather. That's not a reason to come to the UK, trust me.
It was not the weather. It was the fact that I was broke and homeless.
Ah, shame.
And I owed 60,000 rand to the various institutions because I discovered far too late that my second husband was an alcoholic and a gambler. And he stripped me of everything.
Oh my goodness.
And
I put you in debt.
I have to thank Nelson Mandela for creating a moratorium on debtors going to jail, because he declared that there were too many real criminals in jail.
Sure.
And therefore I didn't go to jail. But
For debt you hadn't even racked up.
No, I hadn't.
No, I
These
mean,
were old.
but in the old order, you could have gone to jail for.
I would have.
That's just crazy. See, this is before we finish the story. Let me say, this is what's always bothered me about this. Look, I appreciate people should make good on their debts, and I understand the concept of married couples and the debt being shared. Although I think that that's unfair in many circumstances, particularly given past history and how relationships weren't always equal. They were unequal. And so men in particular, sometimes women, but mostly men, could hide debt or be useless and run up debt, and that's unfair. But you know, Australia, they always like to say, is populated by criminals. But most of those criminals were debtors.
They were.
And they were shipped to Australia. They weren't murderers and rapists, although there were some of them.
Yeah.
But they were by and large debtors. And the English solution to debt was to put people in jail. And I've always asked this question since I was a child. How exactly do you expect someone to make good on their debt when they're in prison? That just doesn't work for me. So, I mean, look, I'm all about repossessing things that people have bought with money that they haven't repaid. I understand that. But putting people in jail for debt just never seemed to be a good solution to me.
No.
And so I guess that's good that Mandela put that moratorium in. I didn't realize that South Africa was still jailing debtors in 1994. That's kind of news to me.
They were.
That's crazy.
And I was terrified.
No doubt.
But I'd been brought up in this Victorian system.
Sure.
Where I wasn't allowed to work. I wanted to be a veterinarian.
That's what my mother wanted me to do, to be a veterinarian.
Yeah.
But I wasn't interested.
And I would have been really good at it.
No doubt.
And I did eventually catch up by being a veterinary nurse in a wildlife rehabilitation center. But the mindset of my parents was, the wife is a housewife and she manages the servants, and her husband manages all the finances. And she's given a checkbook and she has an allowance, and that's the way it was. However, it happened that my first husband, who died tragically when he was 27 and I was 23,
shame.
had a 13-month-old baby who's just turned 51.
Wow. That's a few years ago.
Inherited a huge amount of money from him. And I was in such a daze of shock. I was so young and it was so unexpected. And he hadn't made a will, but by Scottish law, each, the progeny of, or the wife and the son, in our case, got equal share.
Yeah.
Although my son inherited a castle, 9,000 acres in Scotland, in Argyllshire.
How do I sign up for that?
You don't want it.
No, because it costs too much to maintain.
It's a money pit.
Oh, they are. That's in Germany. People are like, how come all these castles you can visit? Because they need money to pay the taxes.
Exactly. And this is where I lived with hostile. They did not prepare themselves for their son and heir and the prince of their lives to run off and marry a barefoot girl from Zululand, a farmer's daughter, a colonial.
So your husband was in effect a laird?
Effectively, yes,
yeah,
he was.
Okay, wow.
He didn't have a title, but he was a laird.
This isn't Monarch of the Glen, folks. This is Chris Wyatt Reports.
And at 13 months, my son inherited the whole boiling, plus a huge trust fund.
Still in nappies.
Yeah, he was. And I came back to, my parents brought me back to South Africa
So were you living in Scotland when your husband passed?
Yes,
Oh, you were living in the castle.
yes.
With
Not
the laird?
in it. No, we'd left.
Oh,
because
okay. But you were living in Scotland.
They bullied me so horribly, and we loved each other so much. It affected him.
And so he wanted to be away from that.
Exactly. We moved away to Callander, a lovely little town in Stirlingshire, and yet they continued to haunt us and come down, criticize the fact that I didn't know how to do any housework.
Well, yeah, you grew up with domestics.
Exactly.
So you couldn't have stayed here anyway, because with him gone, all you would have had is in-laws harassing you.
Hostility.
Yeah, so you went back to South Africa.
My parents took me back. I was in a state of, like a zombie.
Probably in shock,
Total shock.
losing your husband.
Well, he accidentally, he walked in front of a truck and was killed instantly.
Well, at least it wasn't painful. He was gone quickly.
No, it was quick.
Yeah.
Could have been.
So you went back to South Africa, and the first oak walking along, you married.
Yes, and he was very keen to marry me straight away because he saw the money.
Ah,
There was tons of money,
was.
and he blew through that. I was married to him for 19 years because I dare not let my sons go into his custody for even an hour because he was never sober. He drove drunk, and they would have spent their time locked in a car outside a pub somewhere till 2 in the morning. So I stuck in this marriage. I became really ill in 1988 with this tick bite fever, which turned into...
So you've had this since 1988, a tick bit you. Wow, that's quite a while you've been living with this.
I went into remission a bit. I was never really well, but I still managed to work in a rehabilitation centre and also in the Okavango Delta, running 2 bush camps, only accessible by air.
I've been there.
Wonderful, and I've written a book about that.
Is this another book?
I've written 5 books,
Oh, okay, all right. Well,
but I only published 1.
I've got this one, the published one.
You have?
Yes.
I couldn't afford to publish any. However, to cut a long story short, I was house sitting because that was the only job I could do in my state of health, and because I could still walk at that stage. And my son, Alistair, who's a clinical psychologist, however, he's moved on to doing computer, whatever they do, with write programs, because he hated what he called mental bum wiping. He just couldn't bear it after 7 years of training. And he put me onto a group called in the ME Association in England. And I sent an email to them saying I need pen pals. And I got about 30 really nice responses, including one man, a Mr. Timms, who persisted and said he'd like to meet me. He flew out, spent 4 months in winter with me, and then he took me back to South Africa, to Britain.
To Britain, yeah.
Because I had, at the age of 50, I had all I had was just this old Series 1 Land Rover, older than I was, and I could no longer drive it. I was too weak. It took some driving. I loved that car, but it was hard work. And I went and I stood on the cliff at the Robberg. Anyone who's been to Plettenberg Bay knows where the Robberg is. And it's a tall cliff and just some rocks. And now you set me off.
No, I just get something to drink.
No, it's all right. And lots of rocks and waves crashing. It's really high. And I stood on the edge of that cliff on my 50th birthday, and I thought, just one tiny step, and I'll no longer be a problem.
Oh my goodness.
To my sons, all who'd already emigrated.
Did you think very seriously about it?
I did.
I'm glad you didn't take that step.
So am I.
So much more to experience, would have been premature.
I know. And it's as fate happens, when I got back to the house I was sitting for, on their computer was this message from this Englishman saying, we'd been corresponding for long enough, and he'd like to bring me back to England. Now, the thing is, I didn't particularly like him.
well, there's that.
But
she kept a straight face there while I'm laughing. She didn't break that straight face.
He wasn't a very nice man, but it was the other choice.
I see.
Stepping off the Robberg or going to England with him,
Sophie's choice.
pretty much.
Wow. Rock or hard place?
It was.
You chose the hard place instead of the rock.
I didn't actually, it just happened.
Oh, okay.
Because if I hadn't had that message, I would have probably gone back to the Robberg and taken that step.
Have you been in Cambridgeshire the whole time, or have you moved around inside?
No, I've not only been in Cambridgeshire the whole time, but I've been in the same little tiny suburb.
Oh, wow.
But I've moved 1, 2, 3 times.
A couple blocks.
I spent 12 years with this man, Mr. Timms, and he was horrible to me. He really was.
Shame.
Very controlling, very wealthy man. I eventually didn't walk out in him. I was wheelchaired out. And he just made my life such a misery. So I left there penniless with a bag of clothes. So now I'd been homeless twice and penniless twice. However, thank you to the British benefit system. I'm not proud of this, but they picked me up and gave me a place to live. And he took 2 years to string out the divorce, knowing I'd accept any crumb from his table. And so I eventually just had to accept whatever little money he gave me. And I'm ashamed to say that I blew it all on a trip to the Serengeti. No, they know about this. And the Ngorongoro crater. And
oh, but that's an incredible place. The Ngorongoro crater.
Isn't it?
Oh, I've been there. It's absolutely amazing.
It's stunning.
I mean, coming down from the rim, going is unbelievable.
I know.
And then I came in on the south side, came down the rim, went around, and then went up on the east side and stayed at a lodge overnight, looking out over it. Woke up in the morning.
I know.
Incredible.
We were
extinct volcano, folks.
It is, and it's because the animals couldn't get out of there.
They've interbred, and they're slightly different.
Species.
Yeah.
Yes.
The lions are very different. They come right up to you.
They do.
Without attacking you.
They did.
Yeah.
Well, luckily the smell of diesel is so overpowering that they don't smell humans, and they don't look at Land Rovers or.
No, they're not. They don't look left or right when they cross.
No,
They just walk right out front of you.
No.
But it is a unique place.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I could have spent so much longer there.
Well, but you were burning through the money, so you couldn't have spent more.
No, I could have, but I was still waiting to go to the Serengeti because I'd fallen in love with that place when I was 12. And
had you been there when you were 12, or just?
No, I'd read a book.
Read a book, okay. The impact of books.
No, I'm fine, thank you. Okay. Bless her heart. It's my
it's her caregiver's checking on her, making sure she's warm.
She's wonderful.
She's got a sweater on. We put a sweater on before we came out here. We're outside because they've got the music inside, and I don't want YouTube giving us a copyright strike. Plus, it's a bit noisy in there, and if we start talking like this, people stare at us and it'll disturb us. So we came outside. Had a bit of wind, so apparently it's calmed down a bit now, so that's good. But let's continue. So 23 years here in the UK.
Not just the Ngorongoro crater.
Oh, okay, back to that, yeah.
But 2 weeks in the Serengeti in a tented camp.
You are desperate to tell the Serengeti story.
And
Go ahead.
because I'd fallen in love. I read this book in the school library.
Yes.
Written by this German family who were determined to save the Serengeti. And it's called The Serengeti Shall Not Die. And on the frontispiece is a photograph of this young man, their son, who had been incredibly involved in saving animals. And he had this lovely little zebra-striped Cessna, two-seater, single prop, and he'd been killed. Oh. He had a bird strike. He flew into a bird, and of course, a big bird, a tiny plane, and he was dead. So it was safe at the age of 13 to fall in love with him. And I knew this was my bucket list, go to the Serengeti.
But you did it.
I'd followed it with a week on Zanzibar Island.
I've been there as well. That's a very fascinating place.
It is.
Very unusual cultural situation.
That was semi-colonized by the Arabs.
Yes, it was. Well, I mean, there was a sultanate there primarily for the slave trade, but also the spices that came out of there too.
Exactly. Yeah. And the spices, as you step off the plane, it almost hits you.
Oh, it hits you instantly. It's like being in the spice section of a supermarket.
Yeah.
Except stronger. Yeah.
Absolutely loved it.
What's fascinating for me is that these huge trees, and when you go and do the tours of the different locations, the guys that climb up those trees,
They do.
Yeah, it's. I mean,
Yes.
it's like 30 meters up.
I know, and they do it without even hesitation.
Yeah, like that. They're just like lumberjacks in America, in the Northwest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Crazy stuff. Well, so you did that. Wow. So that is fascinating. Let's go back to your childhood a little bit, if we can, for a second. So, because you call yourself White Zulu, or did someone name you that, or is that?
No, my grandfather's name was
Right.
Umuntu Mhlophe.
Okay, I got that. And then you used it incorrectly for a while.
I used it, no, I did it just on one live stream.
Oh, okay.
And
Oh,
someone
just one time, okay.
Someone picked me up on it,
Oh, they called you out on it.
and it was a mistype.
Ah, okay.
I meant to say Umuntu Mhlophe, and he said, no, that's a tautology. And I needed to put the record
Clarify it,
straight.
so you got the record straight.
Yeah.
So, were there things from your Zulu nannies and domestics that you learned about Zulu culture that are interesting, or that stuck with you? Oh, everything.
Everything.
Okay, everything.
They sat and told us all the folklore. Now, Zulus have a clever way of keeping their children safe next to the huts, because before they were shot out, there were lions.
Yeah, and they creep up and take at
Oh
night.
yeah, jackals, hyenas, anything rather. And so they told these terrifying stories, which we believed every word. Why wouldn't you?
If you were a
About
kid.
these eagles that would snatch you up and take you away. And that was it was the fish eagle, but we had the crowned eagle in our bush. And I did put a story in about me and two of my younger Zulu friends, and I bullied them into following me up there. They were petrified.
Shaking in their boots.
We learned bushcraft.
Sure.
We learned to track game, any game.
So you
all
knew how to
game.
follow the spoor.
Absolutely. We knew exactly where the drinking,
And you could probably tell the difference between different
absolutely.
leopards
Yes,
and lions.
Yes, yes. We don't
Wow.
have lions, we have leopards, so.
Yeah. Okay.
The lions were all shut out. Oh, so sad. In a place called Lions Bush, in my great-grandfather's time.
But they were still there until then.
Oh, plenty, everywhere. And luckily we have lots of leopards, because we got 80 baboons, a troop of 80, which is a big troop. And they are leopards' favorite food.
Oh, are they? I didn't realize that. Okay.
Oh yes, because every night there was this hideous screaming and racket
From the baboons.
from the bush as a leopard jumped up and pulled.
Snatch one of them.
Yeah, and the interesting with baboons, and I think other primates, is that when they roost, they put the mothers and babies at the very top. Then they put the senior alpha male and the
In the
females,
middle.
the
And then
breeding
sacrificial
females.
males go below them.
The teenagers, male teenagers,
Well, that's clever of
are
them.
expendable.
Yeah.
So they're at the bottom.
They're the foot soldiers.
Exactly.
They're expendable. They're the
So-
pawns in the game of chess.
Exactly. So every night there'd be this terrible caterwauling and screaming as leopard hopped up, because they can sniff them out, and grabbed one. And guests used to come to. Oh, and the other thing were, I don't know if you've come across them, but if you were on the rim of the Ngorongoro crater,
Yes.
is the tree dasi.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Tree hyrax, yeah.
And now they make the most terrible blood-curdling screams.
They sound like children when they scream.
Worse.
Yeah.
Murdered children.
Murdered children. That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
They start off with a series of grunts, which starts faster and faster, and then they start screaming, and I cannot reproduce that noise here without being arrested.
And we don't want to. It's quite terrifying.
And we had those, and guests would come to breakfast, ashen-faced, saying, "Who was murdered
Last night? Oh
we
my
were
goodness.
used to it. And the other thing I loved was going to sleep to the sound of the drums beating. Because on Friday
That
and
was still
Saturday
happening.
and Sunday nights, oh yeah, and I attended those parties. It's all in my book.
Yeah.
Whereas we kids went up with our nannies to where they were holding their own party, and they were drumming, and we had a big fire going, gum trees, and we kids used to dance. We used to do the ijiga, the Zulu dance, which you put your knee up above your head. You really get down there. I can't do it with one hand.
Yeah.
You get crouched down and you throw your knees up in the air and stamp till the dust is flying. And we had the most glorious time there. We learned to smoke bees wild bees out of their
Now, this is not
hives.
something you want to tell a beekeeper.
Hives. They're a fierce bunch, those bees.
Well, they get angry. You're stealing their honey.
And so we learned to do that. Follow the honey guide. I've put in the story of the honey guide there. And also the Zulu folklore that if you don't leave any honey behind for the honey guide, really bad things. He leads you off to
Your demise.
pretty much, yeah.
You know what's fascinating, Fiona, is that it doesn't matter what the culture is. Folklore, folk tales, myths, fairy tales, they all seem to be intended to teach children lessons about life.
Exactly.
I mean, the stories that the Grimm brothers assembled from German folklore. I mean, Hansel and Gretel is a lesson,
Don't go stray.
Exactly, and don't trust strangers, that sort of thing. There's no such thing as a free lunch. All of that.
No.
All of these things are meant. And if you look, and of course I've studied folklore and fairy tales from Norse culture, from Germanic culture, from Native American culture, and also from African.
It's so interesting.
It's so universal. I mean, the stories are different, but the lessons are pretty much all the same. It's about teaching proper behavior. It's about teaching where to go, where not to go, who to trust, who not to trust, and how to behave. I think it's fascinating. So let me ask you this question. It sounds to me like, I don't want to say life is harmonious, but it sounds like the Zulu and the white folks who lived around them seem to have gotten along back then.
It was the most symbiotic relationship. In exchange for protection from other tribes, from my grandfather and my father having guns, that they had this, they called it kraal, of their own huts where they lived, and they had their wives and children there. We had milk cows. We didn't actually run a dairy farm. We ran a beef ranch, but we had a few cows for the family and our farm manager, because my father didn't believe in actually farming. He had a white manager to do it for him. He was the laziest man I've ever come across. And he there was far too much milk for the staff. There was so much milk.
So you gave it to the Zulu?
All of it.
Okay.
Our little family of 6 could barely consume 1 bucket of freshly
Per day.
Senga. I don't know. Senga is the Zulu word. It's the only one I know.
Milked is what I would say.
Yeah, well, that's right. And the farm manager, the old couple there, old to me, they were in their 30s.
Yeah, well, he probably said the same thing about Fiona today.
Well, we did, yes. And so there were just gallons and gallons and gallons of fresh milk for the staff. On top of that, we got subsidized putu, not putu, mealie meal.
Yeah.
Sacks and sacks of it. And we also got big sacks of brown, what we call government sugar, which is the unrefined brown sugar,
unrefined,
which we loved. And they got meat, and any time a beast broke a leg or
Put it down.
died, had
Fresh
to,
meat.
or died of its own accord of something we knew, the staff had all that meat. They also got uniforms, blankets, gumboots, everything they needed, so their salaries were effectively pocket money.
Yeah.
And there was tremendous respect between my parents, not so much my mother. She was a bit of a tyrant.
Your mom was a bit of a tyrant, okay?
Well, that's an understatement. But the respect that my parents treated our Zulu staff was very, well, outstanding, and should be so. The Zulu staff had this adoration for my grandfather, who was a very benign, and he liked children, which is nice about him. So we all lived in tremendous harmony, and that didn't just apply to us. That applied to all our neighbors, and it's a huge farming area. Applies to Afrikaner farmers. we not only had that, we had a Roman Catholic convent next door to us who had a clinic and a school. So the Zulus, in fact, had everything they needed, more than I had, because I didn't get an education.
You didn't go to school until you were 12.
I could have gone to the, but they were Catholics, so that I wasn't allowed. Yeah.
Catholics.
But yes.
You know, it's funny, sorry to interrupt, it's funny because when I grew up, a mixed marriage wasn't black and white. It was Protestant and Catholic.
Oh, yes.
And that was a mixed marriage.
Yes, I know.
Oh, she's in a mixed marriage. Really?
Yes, yes.
Oh, he's a Catholic. What?
Yes, yes.
Strange how the world changes.
I must tell you about the Sangomas, the
Sure.
witch doctors. My grandfather had an interaction. He'd lost a cow. It had gone missing. And he had a very small, I think he had 5 laborers. He called in a Sangoma. And I won't spoil the story, but it was a very successful result. He got his cow back, and it was fascinating to watch this all happening. And another Sangoma came to visit the farm. Someone had called her in to rectify either some romance had gone wrong or was going right or something. She was called in, which is rare. But I was amazed as a child, 10-year-old, how petrified they were when they heard the Sangoma was coming. Of course,
Yeah.
I wanted to know.
Because the Sangoma can do all kinds of things.
Everything.
Can heal, he can also...
I just happened to be around when she came up the path, and I greeted her like a Zulu child would. Little bob and the handshake. It's always got to be, you've got to put out your right hand like this and show your left hand so that there's no weapon.
Oh, you show it. Okay, I thought you put
It's
it on
like
the elbow.
this.
You just show it like this.
If you
Okay.
receive a gift,
Okay.
just like that.
Okay.
And if you offer something, you always do it this way.
I see.
And you do a little bob of the knees. And then in Zulu, I said very politely, she was a sight. It's in my book, but quite staggering looking person. And she said, who are you? And I said, I'm an Mlungu from the farm, clearly. And I looked around for my Zulu friends. We'd been playing, and they'd vanished. Poof. So I had to go and drag this poor young guy out from under his bed, which was on bricks, I noticed, and in jam tins with water. Stop creepy crawlies and the tokolosh. It's real. Well, the Zulus think, and we thought it was real.
If Fiona says so, we'll take her word for it.
It's real. Tokolosh is real. And I was told to run and fetch, because my friend wasn't going to come out of that hut. He said, go and fetch Evelina, my nanny. And I got to her, and she was a middle-aged, well, to me, she could have been 30, woman on her knees, polishing a doorknob. And I said, Sangomas in Zulu. And she went absolutely gay and started to tremble. She was so sad to my mother. She couldn't go and think about it. She said, run and tell Kai, our boy, because he was out chopping wood. So I ran to Mackay and I said, the Sangoma's here. And he also froze and he went grey. And then I ran back and I was dying to know what was going on. But nobody was going to tell me.
Nobody was going to tell you. You know, it's interesting, Fiona, because we're talking about events that occurred over 6 decades ago. And they're with you like they happened yesterday.
Oh, absolutely.
And it seems like they've formed a big part of who you are and how you lived your life.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes. Yes. I have a very simple, how can I put this, relationship with the earth. South African bush. It's so deep. I'm so deeply embedded in the bush that you could put me anywhere on that farm and I'd know exactly where I was.
I believe that in a heartbeat. You know, it's interesting for me because we were talking earlier, you asked me questions about my childhood and we talked a bit about that. But I was born in Maryland, but didn't spend a lot of time there. But as a kid, was around quite a bit, and then left, came back a couple of times briefly. When I went back to Maryland in 1994, it was the first time I'd been there in a decade, and I'd only been there a few times in my life, actually. So I went back, but I knew every road. I knew every turnoff. I knew every business that was still in business from,
Exactly.
And I knew exactly, I was never lost. I didn't need a map.
Every fence post,
yeah,
every
exactly.
gate.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. I went out to where my grandmother lived in these crappy little row houses out towards Gibson Island, which is off of Route 100. No, yeah, it's not 100, but anyway, so I went out there, Mountain Road, it's off Mountain Road, off Mountain Road. And I knew exactly, I didn't even have to go, okay, how much further is it? I just like, okay, it's time to turn right. I turned right,
exactly.
And there it was. And the same fence was still there with the little round silver knobs on top of the fence. It's only about that high, but when I was a kid, that seemed over my head.
It was.
Yeah, and so it's just amazing how that stuff sticks with you. And that's fascinating. So same for you. You could go back and find a spot just like that.
Exactly.
On the farm. Yep.
And I'm so grateful the farm is still there. And if anyone is interested, this would make a very good movie, because we still got the farm. Not a stick or stone has been changed. And my school is still there, my hideous boarding school.
With all those memories, not so good.
It wouldn't be that hard to make a classic like Out of Africa from that, but more real, because she wasn't an African woman. Well, when I call myself an African woman, because you know what I mean.
No, but you're African. You're born in Africa.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
Skin pigmentation doesn't make you African.
It doesn't.
No, doesn't. I mean, that's the thing. When I get this nonsense, the pure ignorance and bigotry of people when they talk about Africa. First off, black folks aren't the only folks who live in Africa. There are lots of Arabs in North Africa.
Yeah.
There's Berbers.
Yeah.
There's Asians of all sorts and stripes.
Oh, yeah.
There's Pacific Islanders who live, in places like Madagascar and Mauritius. Indians all over the continent,
yeah.
and lots of white folks. In fact, if it wasn't for malaria and tropical diseases, Ghana would have a big white population. I mean, the Brits tried. They tried. Hundreds of thousands of people migrated there over the course of a century, and they died as a consequence of tropical. They just wiped out like that, left and right, until they discovered quinine, and things got a little bit better.
Yeah.
But by then, I think the Brits had kind of lost interest in kind of going there as a place. They found Australia, New Zealand, South Africa to be much more a better climate for them. Yeah, much more accommodating climate for them. Well, Fiona, let's shift before we wrap up here. And what I wanted to say is that, so you have been, you've got a YouTube channel.
I do.
And what's it called, so that everyone knows?
It's called White Zulu.
Oh, there you go. White Zulu. So look for at White Zulu. And on that channel, among other things, you were reading chapters from your book, White Zulu. And so those chapters, how long do your videos usually last?
I cut them from 40 minutes to 20 minutes because I'm so aware that South Africans don't have enough electricity to charge their phones.
Fair point.
I have not forgotten that, so I've cut them in half.
Okay.
I've not only done White Zulu, I've done Zulu Mists describing my life in Scotland.
That's one of the other books.
That's my second book.
Okay.
My sequel to White Zulu is Zulu Mists, which I've described exactly as it happened. I've also written my Okavango diary, because while I was there, I kept a diary of camp life and trying to keep the guests and the animals apart because there were no fences. And I had a lovely elephant friend who kept drinking out of my bathtub. They're fascinated by pipes and water. I've written a children's book called Dusty the Bushveld Bear, narrated by him. And I put in everything that I'd left out of White Zulu. I've written a book on Crow, Center for Rehabilitation of Wildlife, and raising a baby white rhino. I think that's all.
But the only one that people can get their hands on is White Zulu.
Unfortunately.
The others are not published yet.
Not published.
They're written but not published. So this one here, folks, you might want to check it out. No, you're welcome.
You.
No, it's my pleasure, Fiona. It's a real pleasure. You came to my channel last year, but I think you probably knew who I was before that. But you came to my channel last year, and I'm grateful you came along with some other folks, as we like to call refugees, who were welcome to the channel, and I appreciate it. It's great to have viewers, and for me it's really awesome to meet with my viewers, and I do these meet and greets and live streams with people, but this one's been more of an interview and a conversation than the other ones. Hendo and I had a good time, but it was quite loud when we were in the restaurant, so I don't think people heard.
You had background music.
Yeah, that was, we were always worried we're going to get a strike and that sort of thing.
But Hendo's amazing.
No, he's a pretty cool guy. Yeah, he's all right for a Western Cape kind of guy.
Oh, he's lovely.
But anyway, I want to thank you. We'll have to do this again sometime because I get back to UK. And it wasn't nearly as far out of the way as I thought it was going to be, although you've traveled a way to get here.
No, not really. You made brilliant time.
I follow the speed limit, honest.
I know.
Honest, I follow the speed limit.
He claims.
No, it's not a claim, it's a statement of fact.
Yes.
The traffic was actually pretty light once I got past the Watford. It wasn't too bad going to Watford, but 60 is the speed limit. I was able to go 60 the whole way. It was thick, but I got through it.
Is 60 the speed limit?
It is. Well, it's 70, but they've reduced it because of congestion and the noise.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's normally 70 on a divided highway.
I don't care.
Yeah, but you're not in a hurry to get anywhere. So,
no.
So I did follow the speed limit to get here. So anyway, we'll have to do this again sometime. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure for me.
Well, thank you so much. I've loved meeting you. It's been an honor for me, I believe. No, I do believe it. I had a bit of teasing from Ronaldo.
Well,
As usual.
you can't take much what Ronaldo says at face value. Ronaldo is a small boy trapped in a man's body who thinks he's 20 and he's actually over 40.
I brought his name up.
40. No, it's okay.
I know. We all love him. And
somebody has to.
I so appreciate that you went out of your way to come and meet me through thick and thin, because you were so exhausted from the rugby. I think you only got back to your hotel at 8.
It was after 8 when I got back, about almost 9 when I got back last night. I did a meet and greet with South Africans who I met at the stadium, and we didn't do a broadcast. We met and I hung out with them and the family for a little bit, and then I finally came back. So by the time I got back to the hotel, it was 9 o'clock. I was going to do a stream, but I was kind of tired, and I didn't want to give the audience a less than than what I should give.
Well, you're a perfectionist.
I am at that, which means that I'm often unhappy with my performance.
Oh, don't be silly.
Yikes.
I think we all have enormous admiration for you.
Oh, it's very generous of you.
Your stamina.
Yeah, I do have a bit of that, but I think it's going to catch up eventually.
As I said, your integrity.
Thank you.
Yes. No, it's been a real pleasure and an honor to have met you one-on-one.
It has.
I'm really lucky.
Likewise. No, same way. I feel the same way, Fiona. It's really awesome to get a chance to come here. So thank you so much for your time and the conversation. And folks, please be sure to give us a like if you don't mind us. We got more likes than viewers at the moment. Thank you. And then Teresa's saying thank you to both of us. Really appreciate it. With the microphone, I hope it sounded pretty good, and I hope the noise. This mic is pretty good at canceling out the noise around us, so I hope that went pretty well. There's an awesome coming up. Thank you, folks. Feel free to, after the stream, go back and leave a comment on the video. Please do that. That does help. We do appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to wrap up here, say my farewells, get a photo snap. We got to do that. That's obligatory. And then we'll catch you guys later on. Remember, it is the UK, so my Wi-Fi is tetchy. I'm piggybacking off of Costa right now, so I got a good feed, but I don't always get that good feed, so I'll be back with you when I can. Also, I need to put some content on my original channel because it's going to die if I don't do that, so I'll try to put a Night Owls on there when I get a chance. Thank you all so much. I'm still around for a few more days in the UK, and I will get down to see Hendo most likely Saturday morning, late Saturday morning, early afternoon. I will go to rugby sometime during the week to meet Keith and whoever else wanted to meet me in rugby, and then we'll see what else pans out during the week. Thank you all so much. God bless, have a safe day, and don't take any wooden nickels because they just get stuck in the slot machines. You're not going to win any money at the casino with a wooden nickel. I'm just saying. All right, folks, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.